Oh, at this bunch here, after the death of Peter, James, John, and Paul, and the destruction of Jerusalem, begins with a man named Ignatius. And some of you Christians need to know this. You don't know your kinfolk when you see them. Some of you don't think you're any kin to me. My manners, my ways upset you very bad, very untactful, very uncouth, and very vulgar, and very crude. Some of you deny any kinship with me. It's quick to look at me. But if you're saved, you're my kin. See? And sometimes it does God's people good to know who they're kin to and who they're not kin to. Now, you don't know your background, so let's see what your background is. I mean, let's take this line of Bibles that lead with the King James and trace them right back to there. First old boy that shows up is a man named Ignatius. He's the bishop of Antioch. That's your boy. No use to fool with Egypt, Alexander, Egypt, and Rome. That's not the boys. It's up here. And you take Ignatius, you know what they did with him? They threw him to lions. You know what that old boy said about his death? He said, I want to have my bones be fine, bread to be ground between the teeth of these beasts for the glory of Jesus Christ. Got him out there and put him out in the Colosseum. He went over the lion's cage and shook his fist at the lions and said, come on out. Now there's a soul, brother. There's one of them. I mean, he never worried about the circumflex accent and the anti-penult or the otis subscriptum under the penult. I mean, that fella, he'd get with it. Or if you take that one there, that's Polycarp, bishop of Smyrna in Asia Minor up near Syria. Not down at Jerusalem, not at Rome, not in Alexander, Egypt. That old boy preaches the gospel, and they bring him up when he's 86 years old and burn him at the stake, and he don't burn very good. And the water comes out and puts out the fire, and the blood comes out and puts out the fire, and they never did get him burned. They finally had to stab him, kill him with a sword, and then burn his dead body. That old boy, when he was asked to reject Christ, he said, 86 years so forth, and my Savior's done this and that for me. Will I reject him now? He wouldn't reject him. Now, here's the thing, Christian. Someday you're going to have to live with those people. You're not going to have to live with Larry Zonk and Johnny Carson. And if you do, if any of them got to heaven, there would be too much to live with anyway. I mean, you could get along with it. What if the Lord moved you in next to those birds? See, that's the trouble. The trouble is American Christians haven't suffered anything, haven't been through anything. You don't know your kinfolk. You know what the word for witness is? It's the word that means a martyr. Now you take that fellow there, Tertullian, he's a good one. He got kind of holiness. The Catholic Church about ready to make a saint out of him. He got up with a bunch called Martinists. They all started shouting and rolling around the ground, you know, and getting the charismatic, and they figured that was enough of him, and they got rid of him. But you take old Tertullian, I'll tell you one thing about him. The old boy was premillennial. He said Christ's going to come back and set up 1,000-year reign on this earth. These folks down here don't believe that. You know what it says in the Amplified Version in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2? The Amplified Version, put out by the RUCKMAN Foundation, recommended by Bob Jones University. It says, the wrath of God has come upon the Jew completely and forever. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. There's the Bible believer in this building that believes that. Amen. You know perfectly well God's going to restore them in the tribulation, don't you? Now imagine the Christian University recommend that a hogwash for a bunch of you suckers. RUCKMAN Foundation, why they're not premillennial? You know where Christ said over there in John chapter 18? He talked with Pilate, and he said, now is, if my kingdom of this world, my servants would fight, but now is my kingdom not from hence. That word now is just taken out. Because the RUCKMAN Foundation doesn't believe his kingdom is ever going to be of this world. So they just took now out. It's in all the Greek manuscripts. And that's the bunch that hollers about the Greek. That's the bunch. Or it's come down here, Chrysostom, great preacher, called him the Golden Mouse. They put him in jail up in Constantinople. He prayed and shook down the city walls in an earthquake, just like Paul. Got out of jail, and the queen exiled him and sent him up to the Black Sea, and he translated the Bible up there and preached to the Russians, and they marched that old man when he was 70 years old out across the Black Sea and marched him till he died. A bunch of soldiers took him on a march, made him walk till he dropped. Chrysostom never used anything but the Syrian Greek text from Antioch any day in his life. Then you have come on here St. Pat. He's a good one. You say, I thought St. Pat was a Roman Catholic. Oh, no, man, no. His father was a married deacon. And why you take St. Pat, he never went to Rome, never wrote to the Pope, never recognized the Pope. When Patrick died, his name was Patricius. Rome made a saint out of him so they could keep control of Ireland. Can't you figure that out? Christ said, why, you go around saying if it had been the days of our fathers, we wouldn't have persecuted the prophets. Full well you bear witness that you are the children of them that killed the prophets. You garnish the tombs of the righteous and garnish their sepulchres and say if we'd been there, we wouldn't have done it. They take some old Bible-believing Christian everybody loves, make a saint out of him, so folks will stay in the church. They'll be able to figure that out. St. Pat was a lousy Catholic. He preached you couldn't get saved with sprinkling. He didn't believe in the sacraments. He got out there in the woods at night and put up a big old drum and beat that thing. Those savages, those selfs and picks came around and got up in that drum, preached hellfire and damnation and thunder and lightning and stooped down to the fire and poison, and he baptized idols by the thousands. St. Pat. He wasn't a good Catholic. He was a good Bible believer. You know what he used? He used the old Latin of the Antioch and Syrian Greek Textus Receptus. He wouldn't fool that junk down there for 5 minutes. And old St. Pat was a real Christian. Won a lot of souls. You come along here as Alban, an English martyr. You come up into the Dark Ages. These Christians are called by different things. They're called Paulicians because they go by the Pauline epistles. They're called Henrycians after a man named Henry of something. Forget the last town he's from. They call him by the town instead of the name. Petrobusians, Peter of Bruys. The Bogomiles in the Balkans. The Waldensians, the Albigens in North Italy and Switzerland and South France. The Cathari, the Catharists, the Purists, and the Catholic Church. In the Dark Ages, there were 4 million saved people in the Catholic Church that called for a cleanup of the Catholic Church, and they never did clean it up, but they objected to the sacraments and objected to prayers for the dead and objected to purgatory and objected to using images in worship. God has always had a witness, and through the Dark Ages he had his witness. Now, there was less light there than there is any time in the history of the world, but there was some light. In France, the Vaudois and the Huguenots. In Germany, the Anabaptists. You ought to read about those folks. Those are your kinfolk. There's, you know what they used to do, some of your kinfolk? I mean, you know, when Ted Kennedy gets in, no telling what you might get into. You know what they used to do, some of your kinfolk? They used to take and put gunpowder in their mouth and blow their heads off. They cut off their tongues. They take their women and take them and throw their babies to pigs and let the pigs eat the babies and make the mama watch. You never read anything Richard Wurmbrand went through or Holland Popoff went through that they didn't go through back in those days. And after all, torture of Christians doesn't begin with communism. How many of you ever read Fox's Book of Martyrs? Could I see your hands? Fox's Book of Martyrs. Hear that pitiful? You only got about 10 people here in this great, educated, up-to-date, cultured 20th century town of Florence, South Carolina that ever read the third book you ought to read after you read your Bible. Fox's Book of Martyrs. Did you know you can't teach Fox's Book of Martyrs in the public school system? Rome won't let you teach it. You know every high school kid in this building knew about Fox's Book of Martyrs, and every high school kid in this town knew about it? You'd have a hard time getting a Roman Catholic in office anywhere in the United States. But who knows about Fox's Book of Martyrs? It's dumb, stupid Americans. They don't know anything. You know, the batting average, you know, Willie Mays and Hank Aaron and all that, you know, that junk. They know what's going on. They know Nicklaus, you know, shot at the 68 and all that kind of thing. Why, listen, they take your ancestors and put them in leather bags and throw them up to rattlesnakes and throw them in the river. They used to take women and hang them upside down with their feet and roast them over the fireplace. Took one of those English martyrs, laid him down there and stretched him and grilled him on one side for 2 hours like a barbecue. And he turned to him and said, I'm done on that side. You can turn me over now. Took one martyr out there to burn him at the stake. That old boy kissed that stake and said, welcome thou cross of Christ, welcome everlasting life. Took a young lady out there in the 5th century and took her up there to burn her at the stake. One of the old papers said, you go to the Mass or we'll burn you. She said, I'm afraid I might meet the devil at Mass. Now there's somebody for you. I put her up there at the stake and put that statue in front of her face, tried to make her kiss it, and she wouldn't do it. When the fire began to consume her, she said, behold, you papist. You're always looking for a miracle. Look at me. I feel no pain. This flame to me is as sweet as a bed of roses. Now, boys, you get your girl like that, you have your real wife. Now, what them clothing store done is, and listen, boy, they racked them and they put them on glass and they suffocated them with smoke and strangled them and cut open the women and pulled them around by their intestines. You ought to read that stuff. You ought to read that stuff. Somebody said Rome's the eternal city. Rome never changes. Well, if it don't, you look for trouble in about the next 10 years. And that thing goes on through the Dark Ages. There's a character. Berthold of Romania. You talk about that character. That guy's back there 200 years before Martin Luther, and he went down to St. Peter's in Rome and nailed a thesis on St. Peter's. Climbed up in the altar and took up the host and said, "That's not Christ, it's only a piece of bread," and threw it down the ground. Boy, you try that back in the Dark Ages when the Roman Catholic Church ran the kings and the governments. That old Pope would put that's a good word for him. That old Pope put an interdict on the country and lay an interdict down in the country. When he put an interdict on the country, any other country could capture him and get indulgences and get time out in purgatory by killing the people. Excommunicate a king didn't fork enough money. Pope, I excommunicate thee in the name of blessed Joseph, blessed Mary, blessed John the Baptist, and all that stuff. And when he excommunicated that king, then any one of that king's subjects could assassinate him and get a reward from the church. Times are tough. Times are tough. There's old Tancumber Flanders. He's a nut. He preached outdoors in the street. He was a drawing board when he preached. Crazy character. I mean, draw and preach at the same time. 1,300. Coop, man. Old Tancumber Flanders, one night he's out in a big old cathedral walking up and down at night. I mean, the Lord's always had his witness. He'll always have him. He'll have him right here in this town. And Tancumber's walking up and down the street. There's this old flagstone, this big old cathedral at night praying. He didn't have any education. Just dumb as an ox. They might have been dumb as an ox. He wasn't any smarter. And he's walking up and down across those flagstones, he's praying, and he's saying, "Lord, send me a Bible teacher. Send me a Bible teacher." Nobody showed up. He paced that cathedral until 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. Nobody showed up. And about 1:30 in the morning, he's walking up and down there with that torchlight in a cold winter night, and he saw a beggar huddled up there against one of the posts with a shawl over him and a wrap. And just for want of conversation, Tancum went by and poked him and said, "How goes it with thee, friend?" And the beggar said, "It always goes well with me." And Tancum was feeling kind of sour that night, and he said, "Well, what if it pleased God to put you in hell? How would it go with you then?" And the beggar said, "Well, I'd be happier in hell with him than in heaven without him." And Tancum came back and said, "Who are you anyway?" And the beggar said, "I'm a king." And Tancum said, "Where's your kingdom?" And the beggar said, "Inside." And Tancum said, "When did you learn that?" And the beggar said, "When I ceased to go to men for wisdom and went to God only." That was his Bible lesson for that night. And then you come along here is Arnold of Brescia and Luther and these fellows. There's some preachers back there. Why, back 300 years before Martin Luther ever showed up, there were guys out there in the fields preaching to 22 and 30,000 people and waving that old Latin, not this one. They burned that one. They didn't bother that one. That's the one they worried about. That thing that had 1 John 5:7 in it. And waving that old book up and down and preaching and saying, the Pope's the devil, the Pope's the Antichrist, the sacraments can't get you saved, you can't get out of purgatory, there isn't any purgatory. Whew. Man. Why, I bet if Brother Monroe preached out here Sunday, he'd lose a lot of Christian friends. You imagine what it was back in those days, man? They'd burn you at the stake, and they'd burn them at the stake. They made bonfires out of them. Why, the Catholic Church many times wiped out whole towns of 10 to 15,000 people. You only ever Catholic give you a hard time about the Salem witchcraft trial. You know, they always got some little gas they're working on. Saying, "Well, you Protestants burn them too in Salem." Oh, yeah, about 15 of them, something like that. Why, when General Tully went up to the Netherlands, he killed 30,000 people in a week. Come along here and you get up toward the Reformation. Things are dark all over. Shades of night are down. The Crusades go over there and come back disillusioned. And about that time, this old boy shows up. His name is Savonarola. And he's an Italian-speaking, Italian-born Roman Catholic in the church. And he gets up in Florence and waves that Bible up there and starts preaching the book of Revelation. That's very interesting. The book of Revelation is not found in the Vatican manuscript used for all these new Bibles. The book of Revelation is not in it. Savonarola must have him another Bible. And he's up there preaching that thing and banging away on that thing. And the Pope said, "Shut that fool up. Shut him up. Shut him up." And somebody said, "How are we going to shut him up?" And the Pope said, "Offer him a cardinal's hat to shut him up." And they came around and they said, the Pope said he'll give you a red hat if you just quit preaching like that. And Savonarola said, "I'll take a red hat of blood." And he got it. He got it. They burned him at the stake. They put old Savonarola up there. You can still see the place in the Florence Square where they burned him. And put him up there. When they set fire to him, the priest said, "I separate thee from the church triumphant and the church militant." And Savonarola said, "You can separate me from the church militant, the one down here, but you can't separate me from the church triumphant up there." And he couldn't. And he couldn't. Oh, they had some brave souls. They took an old English martyr, went down there. He made a mistake. He went down to Mass in St. Peter's and knocked the holy wine out of the priest's hand all over the floor. Terrible man, Blood of Christ all over the floor, You ought to hear Alex Dunlap. Brother, you ought to have Alex Dunlap. You ever know about him? He's the Catholic Conversion Center from Philadelphia, Newark, New Jersey. You think I'm rough. You ought to hear that bird. Boy, he'll come to your pulpit here and dress like a Catholic priest and take you through the Mass and show you the whole thing. And then drop the wafer on the floor and say, "Excuse me, sir." Reach down, pick it up. Oh, boy. And he knocked that wine over like that down there on the floor. They took him out and burned him at the stake. They put that crucifix up in front of his face and said, "Kiss it." That old boy took his good right hand and just knocked the thing out of the priest's hand. That's the kind of crowd. One of those old fellows they took out there, they cut off his hip and they got him to the top of that chopping block. They said, "You going to recant, of your belief?" And that martyr went over to the axeman and said, "Put your hand on my heart." He put his hand in his heart. The martyr said, "If my heart's beating any faster than yours, just don't believe my religion." Now, Axe put his hand in that martyr's heart. That martyr's heart was going boom, 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 boom. That old headsman's heart was going boom, 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 boom. I sure am counting God to give me grace when the time comes. You Christian people in Florence, South Carolina, let me tell you something. If the Lord tarries, it's going to get rough. It's going to get rough. You better pray for grace. When you speak, you better speak with authority. You better know what you believe and why you believe it. When you're called up and have to give an account, you better be able to give an account for the hope that's within you. Hard times coming. They burn him at the stake. And then God got him a German and said, "Go get him." And whenever the Lord wants to tear something apart, you got to get a German to do it. I mean, something about those people. I know I got a lot of that blood in me, man. And sometimes I wish it didn't, But you have to understand history to understand it. My father he blue-eyed, blonde-haired. I get my dark eyes, dark hair from my mother. And she's a Dutch Jew. Father was a Prussian. And that bunch, we were all military people. My grandfather was a general, great-grandfather was a general, brother was a sergeant, I was a lieutenant, all raised that way. We were raised to say, "Yes, sir, no excuse, sir." That's all there was. No alibis to it. In the time I grew up as a young man, I can't remember my father ever one time complimenting me for anything I did. He's dead and gone now. If he asked you to do something, you do it, he'd come around and look at it and say, "Well, do better next time." That's all there was to it. And you take those people, you know what a German will do and an Englishman won't do? He'll carry a thing to its logical conclusion. A German's a collector. If any of you wives married the German men, they got stuff all over the house, all over the barn, under the house, in the attic, and every place else. And every time you try to get the guy, get rid of it, he says, "We might need it." And that's where they are, Just they got certain traits. I don't care what you say about race being the same. They're not the same. Did you know Germans and Frenchmen are not the same? Their difference is much different than some of the race in Europe is between white and black. I mean, they're just not the same. And your Germans save everything, Pick it up and keep it, and collect it. And it always has to be, carried all the way, so no halfway measure. All the way, man. And if you don't work a 14-hour day, you're a loafer. My father, if a guy, these guys talking about a 20-hour week, man. If you're working a 40-hour week, you're a loafer. You're sleeping. If you're working 40 hours a week, why, get home and get to work when you get home. And you take, I'll give you one example. Darwin said that men came from animals. Well, you got some nuts here in Florence still believe that. And they teach it, in the University of South Carolina, every place, evolution. But Darwin wouldn't carry that thing to a logical conclusion. Now, let me ask you something. If men come from animals, what's wrong with gas in them? Don't you gas animals? If men come from animals, what's wrong with cutting off a man's skin and making a lampshade out of it? Or a wallet? You do it with animals, don't you? You see, Adolf, he was demon-possessed and full of the devil, but he was logical. He just carried to a logical conclusion. Darwin said, you got to get rid of the inferior elements. Hitler said, well, the Jews inferior, get rid of them. That's all there was to that. I'm not a fascist or a Hitlerite or anything, but I will say this for him. He carried to a logical conclusion, and an Englishman can do it. Didn't Darwin say, breed them, breed the best together and get the strongest to survive because the fit survive. Isn't that Darwin? That's Adolf. Adolf just take it all away. And God got him an old German named Martin Luther. He's a coal miner. Daddy was a coal miner. Going down Eisenach. And they're poor folks. And Martin Luther was coming up as a coal miner, and he used to sing in the street for money. And when he got to be about 16, he decided to become a lawyer, and he started to study to be a lawyer. And boy, one night, lightning came down and killed one of his buddies and almost hit him to scare the fire out of him. And he got real religious. He decided to be a monk. He took his vows, went to a monastery, and he got that monastery, he whipped himself. He crawled around his hands and knees. He banged his head against the wall. He starved himself trying to find forgiveness of sins. Never found it. One day he got a hold of a Texas Receptus Greek Testament, but Erasmus from the Antiochian Greek, and he opened that thing up, and it said, the just shall live by faith. And that thing got a hold of Martin, got a hold of his soul, and he said, well, what about that? You're saved by faith. You're kept saved by grace through faith. You get saved by grace through faith. You can't lose it. You're fixed by grace through faith. And he carried it to the logical conclusion. He just tore Europe up with it. That fellow got out there. The Pope couldn't kill him. The emperors couldn't kill him. The common man couldn't kill him. He died of old age. While they excommunicated him, they offered a reward for his assassination. I don't know how many times they tried to kill him. One assassin fired down the street one night and stopped him and said, do you know I've been hired to kill you? And I've been following you all day long. I could have killed you 10 times. And Luther said, well, what of it? And the man said, well, in the name of heaven, why don't you carry a bodyguard with you? And Luther said, God's taking care of me. And that fellow dropped his knife and ran down the street. And you take old Luther, he called the Pope your hellishness. Most hellish father, greetings. And boy, he set fire to that powder keg and blew it apart, and they've never forgiven him since. They never forget him. They're mad at him this day for doing what he did. And he translated the Bible in the vernacular German. And if Germany had been an island instead of landlocked, the Bible we'd have here right here in Florence would be a German Heilige Schrift. But Germany is landlocked. And the God who wrote that Bible is the God of history. And God wanted the Bible to go to the ends of the world. It couldn't go to the end of the world into Germany, so the Lord took it across the channel to England. And the German will never forgive him for that. I mean, that English Channel. Why call it the English Channel? It goes right by Germany. Why not call it the German Channel or the French Channel? But you'd have to be Kraut to understand all that. Well, anyway, so he blew the whole thing up, see? And he blew the whole thing up, and boy, when he got going, there were Bibles all over the place. You listen to me. You said German Bible? That German Bible was translated into Latvian, Estonian, Lithuanian, Russian, Czechoslovakian, Romanian, Bulgarian, Hungarian, Hindustan, Chinese, Japanese, and dialects in Africa and Spain and Holland and Belgium 100 years before there was any King James Bible. Don't you worry about the folks who don't have a King James Bible. Most folks got King James Bible. You think they do. Now, you take that thing right there. You know what the Lord did? The Lord got a marvelous sense of humor. The Lord got him a missionary one time. His name was Adoniram Judson. And he got him over to Burma with a King James Bible and translated that thing. And he got up in North Burma and translated into a Chinese dialect. And you know something? When Mao Zedong and his revolutionary army started the long march through China, his troops were illiterate and they couldn't read, and he had to teach them how to read. And the only thing you get a hold of read of was the King James 1611 in Chinese by Adoniram Judson. Isn't that a flip? I mean, don't you know the Lord got ways of doing things? And don't you know Madeline Murray was just about ready to cuss her cigar out of her mouth when those fellows got up there in the moon and read, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. That's the King James reading. That isn't what the Living Bible says. I mean, who doesn't know that? The Living Bible doesn't say in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. And when God wanted to send the Bible up there to his creation, he said, take King James. Oh, I guess I'm cussing mad. And you come along there, and there's old Luther, and Luther dies of old age, and he did carry it pretty far. I mean, Luther, he carried all the way, man, all the way. And Luther would say, you're saved by grace. He said, every Christian ought to be a good, healthy sinner. Every Christian ought to go out and get drunk and tripe a little bit and dance and have a good time just so the devil don't get an advantage of him. Well, you know, I mean, that's kind of strong, see. I mean, I'm a Baptist, but not that good a Baptist, you know. You're like Harold Seidler says, he said, bless God, once you get saved, you couldn't go to hell if you tried. Well, I believe that, but I ain't very safe to preach. And Luther would preach that. He said the devil come to him at night and start leading off his sin, and he'd say, and what about you, old St. Lucifer? I suppose you're pure. Boy, that Bible says don't bring a rating accusation against the devil, boy. That man was tough. Boy, he lay in bed at night, and one night he said the Lord appeared to him. He took an inkwell and threw it at him. And somebody said, how come? He said, everybody knows the Lord's up there at the right hand of heaven. He isn't down at my bed as an angel of light. That's the devil. There's apostolic succession in the truth. And it is never divorced from a King James 1611 AD. Right down the line, right straight through. Now, you ought to know your kinfolk. You folks from Florence, South Carolina, you ought to know what's in your background. And what is in your background is a Bible-believing line of people who believe that book from cover to cover. They may have disagreed about minor points. Maybe back in the Dark Ages they weren't too clear in some main doctrines. But I'll tell you one thing about them. They have been anti-Roman from the book of Acts to where you're standing. And there's one thing about them. They wouldn't fool with a Roman Catholic Bible for $350 million. And that book I got on that table was bought with blood. I ain't going to sell out for anything. That cost the lives of men, that book I got there on the table. And those books didn't cost anybody anything. They made money. That's Madison Avenue from there to there. Nobody suffered nothing. Now you see this bunch up here? Wesley, King James Bible. Whitfield, King James Bible. Finney, King James Bible. Jonathan Edwards, King James. Spurgeon, King James. William Carey, King James. Livingston, dying out in Africa on his knees, praying for the heathen. Cut out his heart and buried it out there. He said he wanted his heart buried in Africa. 5 native boys carried his dead body from Central Africa to Westminster Abbey. I don't know what it smelled like after 150 days in the tropic sun. But they got it there. And in Westminster Abbey, they buried old Livingston. He had those 5 black boys standing around that coffin that brought him all the way from Victoria Falls in Central Africa. King James. That bunch up here, Peter Cartwright, Methodist circuit riding preacher, King James. Every Methodist circuit riding preacher in this country carried in his saddlebag a King James Bible and a hymnal. And there were only 2 books he had. Cartwright used to beat him up to get him saved. He'd get out there in a lumber camp, preaching those Indians and lumbermen, tough men, man. He'd sit down and raise his fist and say, brother, don't you feel the Spirit of the Lord strive with you? Get him converted right and left. I was at time to tell you about him. Old Cartwright one time, he went to a Methodist bishop conference, and he was an uneducated fellow. And one of those bishops decided to make fun of him. So he came up to him and he spoke some Greek to him. And Peter answered in Choctaw Indian. And the bishop said, he knows it. Oh boy, that crazy Cartwright was he's up in the mountains of Kentucky one time. Came to a barn dance on a rainy night and had to stop. Otherwise he wouldn't have. Hitched up his horse, came in that barn dance, stepped in there, about 200 people in there, and dozy-do and squaring off the corners. And he stepped in there and banged off that old black hat. Big, tall, good-looking fellow, about 6 feet 2. And that eyes nearly as black as pitch. And he stepped in there, and some young lady came up and curtsied and said, would you like to dance? And he said, yes, I sure would. Took off that hat, stepped out there and grabbed her by the hand, had a hand like a Virginia hand. And he grabbed that young lady by the hand and said, young lady, I never do anything without asking the Lord's blessing on it first. And down he got on his knees, and she tried to pull away, and boy, you could just like a vice, man. And he began to pray one of those old-time Methodist prayers, you know. And if you've got any modern Methodist friend in this town, don't let them fool you, boys. They're not like that old bunch. Not that old bunch. That old bunch get on their knees and say, oh, God! You know, that kind of prayer. One of them prayers, you know. Oh, God, take these hell-bound sinners and save them. Oh, man, boy. Started dropping the jug, dropping the doghouse, people screaming, running out the door. He had 14 people saved and started a church. Now, if you've got to go to a dance, that's the way to go. And listen, that fellow never used anything but a King James Bible every day in his life. See that fellow Dwight L. Moody? 2 million converts. There wasn't a one of them saved under an RV. And the RV was out at that time in 1884, and Moody was alive and preaching. He wouldn't touch that thing with a 10-foot pole. Dwight L. Moody was about 50 pounds overweight. He died probably 10 years before his time. If he had one sin, it was he loved Boston beans. You ever see a picture of Dwight L. Moody? Stomach, just sound like that, you know. Beard. You think I talk fast? It's a pretty shorthand reporter to take him down when he preached. He said, ain't had none neither. No had nobody. He got finished preaching one time, and a fellow came around and said, I counted 84 grammatical errors in your last message. And Moody said, you see that? fellow said, yeah. He said, I'm using that for the glory of God. What you using yours for? He's a character. They call him Mad Moody. Mad Moody. Here's Sam Jones. That's a great character. Born in Oak Bowery, Alabama. Boy, that's a character there. About 5 feet 8, mustache, dark hairs, and dark eyes. That old boy finished a meeting in a town. All the liquor stores were closed. All the theaters were empty. And all the jails were empty. Folks talk about a revival. This country has never seen a revival like they had during the days of Sam Jones. They got a town in Alabama called Reform, Alabama, after a meeting he had there. And that fellow passed through a town. People would lower their voice when they cursed in the street. When a man cursed, he lowered his voice so he couldn't be heard. That's revival. That old boy preaching, he'd get up preaching. He preached out in Los Angeles, and he said, the mayor of this town, he's no man. He got a shoestring up his backbone for a backbone, got a bunch of French fried potatoes hanging on for ribs. And he said, some of you narrow-hided fellows so narrow-hided a fly could sit in the bridge of your nose and kick you in both eyes at the same time. He's in a post office, and a mayor of a town came in and slammed him with an umbrella and knocked him down, and Sam Jones picked up the umbrella and knocked him down with it. And somebody there said, Sam, you're supposed to turn the other cheek. He said, yeah, but don't tell what you do after that. And he said, besides, I got to take care of Mrs. Jones' husband. And that old boy, he preached all his life and died a natural death of old age. He never knew anything but a King James Bible. Listen, Sam Jones and Mordecai Ham built the Southern Baptist Convention. You better believe it. Did you ever read about Mordecai Ham's addition to the churches in South and North Carolina through 50 years? He built it, boy. He built it. And that old boy was a premillennial King James man, never preached anything but a King James Bible all days of his life. Mordecai Ham preaching up here in the hills of Kentucky. He came out one night, 5 fellows outside trying to pick a fight with him. One pulled a knife on him. And Mordecai said, you're a coward. Put that away. And the fellow said, what do you mean I'm a coward? He said, I don't have a knife. You're yellow to pull a knife on an unarmed man. He pulled away, and the fellow said, I'll kill you, so-and-so. And Mordecai said, I'm going to ask God to kill all you fellows. And got me he's right in front of him and prayed for all 5 of them. And they were all dead in about 2 years. You know who led Billy Graham to Christ? Mordecai Ham. I want to come how some of our Southern Baptist brethren don't ever talk about that. How come some of you Southern Baptists don't know about Mordecai Ham? Know so much about Billy Graham? How come you don't know about the fellow led him to Christ? If you ever read any Mordecai's sermons, you'd wonder why there's much talk about it. You talk about a mule skinner. That old bird was had a meeting over in Charlotte. When he came downstairs, the night before Billy Graham was saved, when he came downstairs, went out to his car, a gunman came up and put a .45 in his side. He said, I'm going to give you 5 seconds to get in that cab. We're going to drive you out of town. And Mordecai said, I give you 5 seconds to put that pistol up or I'm calling the cops. And the guy put it up and left. All right, then you got up here, you got Billy Sunday. Great soul, man, great soul. Billy Sunday, converted baseball player. He never used anything but a King James all his life. All the time Billy Sunday preached. The faculties at Wheaton and the faculties at Moody and Fuller were recommending the American Standard Version as the most accurate translation of the Scripture. Billy never touched it with a 10-foot pole. He probably led 5 million people to Christ. He's the only evangelist that ever lived that shook the hand of more than 1 million people. I mean, shook the hand, not preached to them, shook the hand when they came down the aisle. Somebody said it was sensationalism. I don't believe that. I met some of Billy Sunday's converts in the last 20 years. Still alive and still saved and still know the saved. He led Lucius Eddy to the Lord when Lucius Eddy was 81 years old, and Lucius Eddy led over 100 grown men to Christ before he died. That's got to get with him, boy. He get with him. Preaching one night, he got down the front row, took a horsewhip and hit him right in the middle of the sermon with a horsewhip. And Billy jumped off the platform, took it away from him, and knocked him right over the bench. I mean, not all the Lord's people are, you know. You got all kinds of kinfolk.